Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Friday, October 9th, 2020. And our top stories today: the pandemic creates a boom for the freelance economy, but also hurts rural healthcare. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Devin Banerjee. He's Senior Financial Services Editor for LinkedIn. He's also the editor of the This Week in Finance newsletter, which you can find on the LinkedIn platform. Devin, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Absolutely, Jeff. Happy to.
It's great to talk with you. Lots going on the LinkedIn platform, I'm sure, when it comes to financial services and so many other important topics. But what's top of mind for you this week?
Yeah, certainly lots of topics, Jeff, including the nature of the workforce and the transformation of the labor market. So one of our more popular items this week was about the state of the gig economy. And this was based on Upwork's 7th annual study of the state of freelancing in the United States. Upwork is that popular talent marketplace, and they do this annual study that tends to get a lot of attention. So let's just start with the growth of this gig economy. So the preceding 5 years before this pandemic, 2014 to 2019, we saw the number of gig workers in the U.S. grow each year by a steady pace, just under 1 million a year. This year, that jump is about 2 million in just the 12 months of this year. That brings the number of workers classified as these so-called gig workers to about 59 million in the U.S., and that's about 36% of the U.S. workforce right now. Some other takeaways: these freelance workers are set to contribute about $1.2 trillion in earnings to the U.S. economy this year. That's up 22% from 2019. So this pandemic period is really driving the growth of freelance work, the growth of independent contractors. The Upwork study found that companies of all sizes, really across the board, are starting to rely more on freelancers to fill those gaps after furloughs and layoffs, or to take on those projects that have been dropped during this turbulent time. It's also really providing opportunity for young working adults. So generationally, when you look at the data, you see that Gen Z cohort of the workforce, which is about 18 to 22-year-olds in the working age population, more than half of them report freelancing in the past year. So for them, it's sometimes quite a tough job market coming out of high school right now, or coming out of college, and they're turning to this freelance work. And all of this really jives with LinkedIn data as well, Jeff. You and I have talked about the biweekly pulse that we at LinkedIn do, checking in on workers across the United States. And what we've seen with freelancers is a recovery in their confidence. We measure workers' confidence in their personal finances, their job outlook, and their long-term career outlook. And we saw, after a very difficult spring, which is important to mention, freelancers were really hit hard at the start of this pandemic and this downturn. You and I have discussed back in March and April, companies were freezing budgets, slashing projects. Those projects for freelancers were very hard to come by. And starting in early May, when companies found their footing, they had made those quick short-term adjustments. That's when we saw them ready to assign work again to independent contractors. And we've seen that confidence rise since early May.
Well, Devin, very pleased that freelancers have kind of gotten a springboard back into the economy and are doing well. I guess I would imagine sentiment is mixed on the platform in terms of the conversations. Is this a good thing? Will this be long term? Any thoughts there from the 700 million subscribers of LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. It's a good question. One of our most recent data points in our Workforce Confidence Index has been asking active job seekers, so those who could go any direction right now, are looking for work. We asked them, what would you consider doing to find your next opportunity? And of 10 different options like relocating or going back to school or pivoting your industry or your job function, of those 10 options, the third most popular one was taking on freelance work, becoming an independent contractor. About 48% of active job seekers right now are considering doing that. So, 48% is not a majority, and it's not that much less than a majority. So about half of job seekers right now are thinking about that freelance work. So you're right that it's kind of mixed. I would also say a huge part of the conversation, and very relevant to this program, Jeff, is what it takes from a personal financial management perspective to become a gig worker. I mean, it's obvious, but we should point out, relative to full-time workers who have employer-sponsored benefits like health insurance, 401k plans, and those employer matches, paid time off, gig workers shoulder a lot of those responsibilities themselves. And so we also collected some personal finance advice for gig workers specifically. I'll just run through a couple. Number one is emergency savings. So important. Gig workers are most susceptible to financial hardship if they face an emergency, again, because they're not salaried, they don't have that paid time off or other employer protections. So you want to aim to start with $1,000, then maybe work up to 3 months of living expenses, then 6 months, then 9 months. Number two, you'll love this, Jeff, is really researching and focusing on retirement saving options. Opening an IRA, consider automating a percentage of your incoming checks from your freelance work. Consider automating a percentage of that directly into that account. If you don't have health insurance, that's another very important point. If you don't have insurance via a second job or via a spouse, which about 2/3 of gig workers report not having health insurance via a spouse, by the way, you want to research your state's health exchange and consider buying that coverage. So a lot of really important considerations for gig workers.
Absolutely. And it's a double-edged sword. You gain your independence. Sometimes as a consultant, you can earn more income, but you're right, when it comes to some of these important benefits, and I gave you a thumbs up while you were talking about retirement, that's one where you have to think about today and tomorrow, Devin. So absolutely important information, great for people to consider who are thinking about that gig working route. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, rural healthcare has been hit extremely hard by this pandemic. You're going to want to stay tuned right up here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
The windows on our homes, they protect us and the ones we love, but they do much more. At Renewal by Andersen, making your home more comfortable is at the center of every window we make. It's why we custom build our windows in America and install them in as little as 1 day. It's why we build our frames with exclusive Fibrex composite material that's 2 times stronger than vinyl. It's why our glass helps keep your home warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and quieter all year long. It's why we stand behind every window with a 20-year limited warranty. Why not help lower your energy costs while giving your home and family the best?
Call 1-800-835-6525 to schedule a free in-home consultation. Buy one, get one at 40% off with this special offer.
Plus, get special financing with no money down, no monthly payments, and no interest for 1 full year. Renewal by Andersen, the better way to a better window.
Call 1-800-835-6525 now.
Welcome back. We're talking to Devin Banerjee. He's Senior Financial Services Editor for LinkedIn. Devin, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Absolutely, Jeff.
So we're going to shift gears now, go from gig working and freelancing to the state of rural healthcare, which, Devin, as we talked about numerous months ago, wasn't great to begin with. I remember talking to you about rural health deserts. What has the pandemic done to impact our friends in the rural parts of our country?
That's right, Jeff. That was a perfect introduction because you're right. You and I spoke just a few months before this pandemic hit. I think it was the end of 2019 about these medical deserts and how urgent a problem it was for healthcare access across the country. And I'm here to report that it's only gotten worse because of the pandemic. So you remember many rural hospitals were closing their doors before this pandemic. The medical workforce in rural parts of the country was shrinking. And now, as the pandemic has made its way from major cities to these rural parts of America, it's only straining the healthcare infrastructure more. And so, this story is based on a new nationwide poll that we were featuring this week, done by Harvard and NPR, that finds that 1 in every 4 rural U.S. households has been unable to get medical care for serious problems during this pandemic. And there's so many great anecdotes in the reporting that NPR did around this. And by great anecdotes, I mean unfortunate anecdotes, but very telling ones. People with 1 to 2 hour drives to their nearest healthcare facility or hospital. Even when they make those drives, doctors, of course, in many of the recent months, have stopped seeing patients just out of COVID precautions, or they're not accepting new patients. And so there are stories of people or families driving several hours to different hospitals all around their state looking for that care. And in addition, rural areas are disproportionately being affected by COVID even to begin with. And so those infections in rural areas are now at record levels in recent weeks. 54% of rural counties in the U.S. are designated as that red zone with high infection rates. 14% of the 14% of the U.S. population lives in rural counties, but in recent weeks, 20% of new COVID cases have been in these counties, and 23% of COVID-related deaths have been in these counties. So not only is access to healthcare more difficult to come by in these areas, but the need for it is only increasing because of this disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on these areas.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously unfortunate. In terms of innovation, though, Devin, I've been reading, for example, Walmart having clinics, other technology startups trying to find ways to deliver healthcare, lower healthcare costs, etc. What are the thoughts of some of the subscribers on the LinkedIn platform in terms of offering solutions? There's not a one-size-fits-all possibility here, but what are some of the general feedback that you guys are seeing on LinkedIn?
It's a great question. We're certainly seeing a lot of healthcare providers, or even other types of companies, like you mentioned, retailers or malls, turning their vacant spaces or those huge parking lots into healthcare facilities that can fill in some of those deserts and those gaps in rural parts of the country. So we are certainly seeing that. I don't think it's happening at large enough scale or quickly enough to meet this demand, but of course that is happening. Then, of course, Jeff, there's the rise of telehealth. You and I have talked about that several times. That will only continue. Experts think that will be permanent even after this pandemic ends. But of course, there are shortcomings to it. If you need hands-on treatment, if you need a surgery or something like that, of course that cannot be done virtually. Also, one of the interesting takeaways from this poll is specifically in rural parts of the country, there is still broadband challenges. About 1/3 of rural households in this nationwide poll reported having serious problems accessing internet or strong enough internet to have those conversations with their doctor, or they don't have a device to do it. And in addition, the financial strain and those out-of-pocket costs are only getting worse. That's the whole economic effect conversation that you and I have been having for months. And in this recent poll, more than 40% of those rural-specific households report having serious financial problems. And as with many issues in this country, for Black and Latino households, that's about 80% facing those challenges. And so there are other options, of course. There is innovation occurring. There are people who are striving to bring costs down, but there are so many challenges. It's a very complicated system, the healthcare system, and so there are still people struggling. And that pace, going back to the high-level trend, the pace of hospital closures in rural areas has only increased because of hospitals' financial problems themselves. Yep. I mean, during the COVID-related shutdowns of the mid-pandemic or the summer of this year, you remember so many elective procedures and elective surgeries had to be canceled. Those are really the big revenue drivers for hospitals. And so we've seen 15 rural hospitals closed in the U.S. so far in 2020. And that's far outpacing the annual pace of the past 15 years. The past 15 years, we've seen about 174 rural hospitals closed. And so everyone is having financial strain, economic strain, and that's just not helping anybody, basically.
Yeah, I feel like, even though we've seen the stock market kind of return to record levels, I think this illustrates kind of the disproportionate, how that is not in parallel with the economic recovery. And it is very different. And look, if you're on dialysis, if you have diabetes, if you have some kind of health issue, you need to get seen and taken care of. And so there have to be ways to deliver those services. I mean, you can't expect people to necessarily come to you, but you can't also expect to have to drive 2-3 hours to get those services. I mean, that the cost alone in gasoline and in time is really, really large. Well, Devin, this is again one of the top issues. I think healthcare, retirement, rebuilding some of our infrastructure, to me, is something that we need to continue to talk about. Well, Devin, we're going to have to leave it there. Great reporting as always. Thank you for sharing your perspective, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Absolutely, Jeff. Take care.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, and more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. Don't forget, we're back again tomorrow for BRN Weekly. I'll be joined by a very special guest, and we'll be taking a look back at some of our best segments for the week. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.